And you can
Okay.
you can dance behind the scenes.
Are we
So
already
Are we
live with
already
our
live with our
clubhouse team?
clubhouse team?
yes, we are.
Whoa!
Whoa!
Here we
Here we
go.
go!
This is the
This
best
is the
part of the
best part of the
briefing.
briefing.
There you go. There goes Maya. And here comes the big wave washing away. Oh, there. Okay. Here we go. Get ready, Maya.
Woo! Good morning to everybody again. Good morning to you, Timothy. And
Good
thank you
morning,
very
Maya.
much,
How are
really,
you?
How are
for.
you?
I'm fine, thank you. I hope that you're fine too.
It's a
It's
bone.
a bone.
Oh, it's a bone. Yes, it's the Bone Week. Thank you very much to everybody who is watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Clubhouse, listening to us in Clubhouse. Thank you for joining us. Timothy is here once again. We had a bit of technical difficulties before we launched today's live stream, but hopefully everything will be fine. So this is the 131st episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley and me as a host, Maya Matsuoka. And today we're going to talk about wages. We're going to talk about reshuffle, a possible reshuffle of the government, and some other things as well. Timothy, I'm not going to keep you waiting anymore. So you're the star of this show. And yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Thank you very
Thank you
much,
very
Maya,
much,
and good
Maya, and
morning,
good morning,
everybody. Today
everybody.
is
Today is
August
August
13th,
13th,
2023.
2023. I'm
that
going to that
reverb
reverb on my.
sorry.
Sorry.
So it's
So
been a
it's
very
been a
active
very active
week.
week.
Maybe Maya,
Maybe
if you
Maya,
could
if
turn
you
off
could turn off
your mic.
your mic.
That would help me. How is that? Oh, that fixed it. Oh, good. Okay. Once again, good morning, everybody. So today is the 13th of August. Last week, we had our regular briefing. It was actually Hiroshima Day, 3 days later to be followed by Nagasaki Day. So this is Obon. This is a special time for the Japanese people. People, as you know, if you're living in Japan, everybody's clocked out. They're going to their ancestral homes, maybe cleaning up the grave sites, visiting grandma and granddad. The beaches are full. We've got two typhoons that are attacking southern Japan and one that is headed toward the Kansai region to hit on Wednesday. So there's always something going on in this wonderful archipelago, and appreciate you tuning in to find out what's going on, mostly on the political level, but also what's going on that's of importance geographically, geopolitically, diplomatically in this country that we have such a strong feeling for. So as I said, there's a typhoon that will be hitting the Kansai region. It is dancing around. It was supposed to hit the Kanto region, and it took a turn towards the south. It looks like it will hit the Kansai region, Kyoto, and pass off, go across the island, and move on towards to China and South Korea. So that is expected. It's a big one, so it is expected to have a lot of damage in the Kansai region before it hits ground and begins to die down a little bit. Nevertheless, the travel in Japan is really exploding. If you're watching that, or if you're living in Japan, you can't help but notice the vast number of people who are traveling to Japan. So apparently, this is a release of all of these pent-up expectations during COVID when people couldn't come to Japan. And we are now at about 94% of what the tourism was before COVID hit about 3 years ago. And importantly, a lot of people were complaining about so many Chinese being in Kyoto and in Tokyo buying up all of the goods. So they've been restricted from traveling to Japan. China released its travel restrictions about 6 months ago. It allowed its citizens to travel to 60 other countries around the world. Japan was not included in that. On Thursday, China released that restriction, and so the first tour group from China in almost 3 years hit Japan. The main department stores are looking forward to this. If you don't know the word bakugai, this is like bakuhatsu, explosion, and kai, purchasing. Explosive purchasing, which is practiced by the Chinese. They come over in droves and they buy everything on the shelves because Japanese products are well known for their quality and they've got a high status and they're not generally available at the prices that you can pick them up here. So people come in, they buy, 3 or 4 rice cookers, they buy the toilet seats, they buy all sorts of things, makeup, all sorts of consumer goods, and it really does boost the economy. As you might be following with the casino and the integrated resorts, they have predicted that if the Chinese are not coming in, if the Chinese whales don't come in, then this opportunity for these integrated resorts to be successful falls on its face. So the Chinese, Japan's number one trade partner, are incredibly important to the economy here, to boosting the standard of living. And tourism is kind of an activant to other things in the economy. So that's why we always keep our eye on it. But right now, 94% is not bad. We're in Obon. It's going to continue. September should be lively as well. Actually, the economy has taken an uptick. There's been some wage increase, and the inflation is beginning to, it's beginning to plateau. It's not beginning to fall. So wages for Japanese workers is real wages, nominal wages, are lower than what the inflation is. So people are actually losing a little bit of their income as a consequence. Happily enough, they're spending a lot more money on travel and outside dining. The statistics have shown that this quarter, ending in August, will be far better than the last quarter, and it was 2 quarters where the economy is actually beginning to increase. So there's some good things to look forward to, but as you know, there also have been a lot of price increases for food and energy, gasoline, and also just the cost of subscriptions have gone up. So there's a lot of cost increases that are going up. It's basically unsustainable. The Japanese population is not going to tolerate that much longer. The report on the appreciation of the Japanese on the handling of the economy by the Prime Minister has hit a new low, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Japan, South Korea, and the United States will have their summit, long looked forward to summit, on the 18th of this month. So today is the 13th, so it'll be this next week where the 3 countries will get together. They will be meeting with President Joe Biden at Camp David. This is the first time, I know you'll be shocked to hear this, this is the first time for President Joe Biden to use Camp David with foreign leaders in his presidency. So it's a kind of big deal. I guess they'll cut the grass and spruce things up, but it's a big deal for South Korea. It's a big deal for Japan. And they have already announced, in anticipation of this summit, that it will now be an annual event, probably at around this time of the year, where the 3 countries get together. There's been a lot of development in the relationship building between Japan and South Korea. The sharing of information is vitally important. There was a release of some startling disclosures that Japan has been leaking like a sieve, with the Chinese espionage being very successful in hacking defense systems and some of the networks that Japan is for strategy and defense posture. It really has, this report came out just recently. It was released recently to the press in Washington, D.C., but it is a report that reflects what happened maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. So this is only now beginning to surface. It is probably the underlying reason why Japan has not been vigorously invited to join Five Eyes, which is this intelligence sharing group of countries in the region. But the defense minister has promised that the holes have been plugged and that cybersecurity is receiving renewed attention. But the fact of the matter is, Japan is having trouble with the digital agency and staffing that with appropriately educated technocrats, and also with the defense ministry and the cybersecurity agency. It's just really, there just aren't enough people at a high enough level of training to deal with that. So we've talked about the education system here in Japan, the prime minister earmarking several $billions to upgrade about 100 universities here and to give them more money for green technology, for cybersecurity, and that sort of thing. But with the population declining, it is, it's kind of a catch-22. And as a result of that, we reported 2 weeks ago, I misspoke a little bit about the percentage of foreigners that live in Japan. And the real number is approaching 2.4%. And that's big. It used to pretty much hover around 1%, with the vast majority of those living here from foreign countries being Chinese, Vietnamese, and South Koreans. And there's a great influx now of foreigners that are coming into Japan to take up jobs and to actually emigrate here, bring their families, not just because of their jobs, but because of the experience, and because maybe it's a better lifestyle for them. It's exciting compared to where they are living now. So you hear a lot about the declining population growth of the Japanese, but you hear less about this influx of the foreigners. And I think it'll become more newsworthy as time progresses. But it is, they say that perhaps in the next 7 or 8 years, it'll approach 10%. And that is huge, going from where we are right now to 10%. But if you live in Tokyo, Osaka, or maybe Kyoto, and you live there, you will notice that there are more foreigners, their families walking the kids and the dog than you have seen previously, especially over COVID. The Quad Nations are having a joint military and naval exercise in Sydney. This is the first time for Australia to host the Quad. They're having live fire drills, naval exercises, coordination, and deployment with the 4 nations of the Quad. That's India, Japan, the United States, and Australia. They're trying to develop this cohesion where, should something happen in the South China Seas, or should something happen with regard to Taiwan, that they will be well practiced in doing that. So it's a big deal that they are having these exercises. They're having them actually pretty regularly. This is the first time outside Sydney Harbor for them to do that. The Japanese, the Americans, and the Australians have contributed guided missile destroyers, airplanes, and all sorts of things like that. And the Indians have kind of ponied up and sent a frigate. So you can see that, demonstrably, the Indians are part of the Quad. They're not really robustly invested in it because they're so tied to Russia. Most of their military equipment is coming from Russia, and so they're a bit conflicted. But they're an important part, and weaving them in is, I think, one of the objectives and the goals of the Biden administration. So we're going to continue to follow that. It's a pretty big development. Russia launched a moon lander just this week, and this is their 29th attempt, I believe, to land a vehicle on the moon. This is for the South Pole, and you might not know it, but there is a heated competition going on now. India just launched theirs a couple of days earlier. It is unclear now which will land first, but the Russians are in a sprint to land first on the South Pole, where there is reported to be vast amounts of water. The Russians have been doing this since 1959 was the first time they launched a lander. It touched down. It didn't quite do what it was supposed to do. It crashed. But 2 years later, maybe 8 years later, they landed another one. This would be Luna 9. So after 7 other attempts, they did finally land a soft-landed vehicle on Mars. On the moon. This is at a time when the United States was also planning, the first man on the moon. So this continues to go unabated. There's something going on in the moon. It is attracting the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Indians too. So in this next week, it takes 5 days for the rocket to get there. They will circle the moon, maybe 5 or 6 rotations, and then they will pinpoint their descent and then take it from there. They could accelerate that time so that they land. There's apparently a competition who's going to land first between Russia and India. So keep your eyes on that. There should be some big news. And let's see what happens with the exploration of the moon. It's a strange place because the United States landed man on the moon apparently a couple of decades ago, and didn't go back. So there's a lot of mystery that's going on there. We'll continue to follow that. Expo news. I know everybody's interested in what's going on in Expo in the Kansai region in the man-made island called Umenoshima, where they're building the pavilions of the expo. It's now 600 days away, so the clock is ticking. This is a major kind of trade and investment fair. All the countries of the world are invited there. There are 50 state pavilions that should be built, and maybe 70 or 80 or so other pavilions that are of a lower size that can be jointly occupied, public pavilions, that sort of thing. But there are 50 that are supposed to go to individual nations. And only one nation has signed up for it, that's South Korea. So this buddying up between the United States, Japan, and South Korea, you can see this represented in them, providing their construction request 2 weeks ago. It takes a while for the construction request to get approved by the Osaka government, but you can believe that this one will be on greased skids because it's the only pavilion that a country has come up and said, we will build it. So the problem with the pavilions is they need to be built according to standards that are dictated by the Osaka government, because they'll have the 6-month Osaka fair. As usual, it's a state fair, it's a nation fair. It travels around the world. This is the first time for Osaka to have it since I think the early 60s. And that was a big boost to the economy. And so they hope it's going to be something similar here. But with people not coming up, they're not showing up, they're not providing, their building plans, the Osaka government and the national government, in fact, is a little bit concerned about that. There's a little bit of politics involved, as you can imagine, this being Osaka. So they've got the pavilion places for the expo, and next to it is the construction site for the integrated resorts, which is a vastly bigger construction project. But the expo is supposed to attract, thousands and thousands of people. They don't know if it's going to go off. So the current conversation now, for those of you that are following it and are really interested, is that they might postpone it, or they might just lower the standards for construction of the pavilions. They really need more countries to be involved. And if they're not, it's just going to fall flat on its face. And they're having a lot of furious meetings about that, how to encourage countries to come in and build their pavilion, provide, the architectural designs and the construction for that. There are a couple of things that are hampering that. One is the cost of labor, the cost of materials, and also we're now getting into a time crunch. So it's something to watch. I think they're going to still follow through with the expo, but it is beginning to get a little bit of a concern. How many in the audience have climbed Mount Fuji? Please raise your hand. Oh, okay, that's a good amount. I myself have climbed Mount Fuji 4 times. They say if you climb Mount Fuji more than once, you're certified as really lacking in intelligence. So I think the proof is in the pudding here. But the season has opened. It's been open now for about a month. It runs until September, September 20th, I believe. And that's when they will close the paths to the summit. But right now they're suffering from so many people climbing the slopes to get to the peak at sunrise, which is a Mount Fuji climb is a nighttime climb, as you might not know. It's a nighttime climb, and you pace it so that by the time you are at the summit, you've gotten there before sunrise. You sit down and then you watch the sun rise. The sun touches Japan at the peak of Mount Fuji. It's the first place the rays of the sun hit the archipelago. And so it's something of a special spiritual moment for Japanese. They are now trying to consider limiting the number of people that are climbing the mountain. Currently, they are proposing, if there are more than 4,000 people that are climbing the mountain, they're going to restrict it to 4,000, which means they might not even know this until the people are climbing up past the 5th station, the 6th station, or the 7th station. The current proposal now is that the police will prevent people climbing past the 8th station if the numbers are greater than 4,000. So if you think about it, you've climbed up you're almost all the way up to the top of the mountain. You're at the 8th station, ready for your ultimate push. It's maybe 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, and the police say, sorry, you don't qualify, you got to go back down. That would be a crushing blow. So they're considering that, but you might see a lot of news about Mount Fuji, and unfortunately, the newscasters love to focus on the foreigners who try to climb Mount Fuji in flip-flops or tennis shoes, totally unprepared, no food, no preparation. And it's something to snicker at because it happens a lot. And it makes for good news coverage, but it's not very flattering. So for those of you who are thinking about it, make sure you prepare yourself and, look at what the web pages say about, registering for a hooch, someplace where you can lay down for a couple of hours, maybe get something to eat. So if you're going to make the straight climb all the way up, that's a pretty tough one. Young people could probably do it, but it's a bit of a challenge. But when you're climbing Mount Fuji, frequently you've got old Japanese people that are passing you along the way. So it's good to be prepared for it. Don't do it just on a lark. September 1st marks the 115 years since the Great Kanto earthquake. So today is I keep forgetting, it's the 13th. So in another 2 weeks, September 1st will be the 115th anniversary of the Great Kanto earthquake. This was a massive event. It destroyed much of Tokyo, great firestorms, many thousands of people were killed, and it triggered a exodus of Japan of many people going to Brazil. So Brazil has the largest population of Japanese than anywhere else in the world. The Nisei, who occupy Brazil, they are now Brazilian citizens. Maybe some of them are dual citizens if they've been traveling and emigrating within the last couple of years. But the number of Japanese citizens that went there as a consequence of the Kanto earthquake is just massive. And it was at a time when the Japanese were actually, traveling to other countries. In, 1924, the United States had already imposed the immigration law of 1924, excluding Japanese from emigrating to the United States. At that time, a lot of them were going as farm laborers, just manual laborers going to the United States. And apparently, during this time, Japan was hot in its colonial expansion, and the United States prevented them. But the Brazilians welcomed them with open arms. So the Kanto earthquake, you might not know, was at 7.9 on the Richter scale. And of the 188,000 people that traveled to Japan traveled to Brazil during maybe a 10-year period, about 85% of those were as a consequence of the Great Kanto earthquake. So 2 million are now living in Brazil and enriching their economy there, enriching their culture. They have actually had a big impact on the culture, and they still do to today. So I think probably in early September, you'll see a lot of Brazilian kind of festivals that are going on there. I'd like to shift now to what's going on with our prime minister. Fumio Kishida is suffering from the lowest approval rating. I mean, statistically, it's 1 percentage point above what his lowest point was when he first started as prime minister. But it is in the danger zone, obviously. There has been a GG poll. Over 4 days, they contacted a lot of people, got their input on how they feel about the prime minister, about politics, about the LDP, many things in general. And they reported these on Friday, and I'd like to tell you about that. So the appreciation for the cabinet has dropped to its lowest level since he took office. This is attributed to the My Number snafu. There was a meeting just this last week. It was the first report of what's going on with My Number. So a formal report. They had the prime minister and Mr. Konotaro sitting at his side, talking about what happened, how it happened, what the plan is for fixing it. The prime minister said, we are fixing it, and we're going forward with this integration of the health card and the My Number system. They're going to be integrated in 2024, as we had already announced. There's no change in that plan. And we're fixing it, and we'll give you another report at the end of November. So it's buying more time. The prime minister is in a bit of a bind here because his popularity is dropping as a consequence of many of the mistakes, some of the errors that have been lodged, and he's got some other scandals that are kind of brewing that also tend to drag him down. When you talk about the kinds of issues that the My Number system is is handling, the report released says that 26% of the local governments that were initiating the My Number system did it wrong. So a lot of people like to point to Konotara, it's his fault. Well, they revealed that 26%, they were just doing it wrong from the application phase. And many of these, interestingly enough, a lot of the errors occurred for the civil servants, Japanese civil servants. They have a pension plan and their health benefit plan. And for some reason, they suffered a higher number of errors than the general population. So they're trying to figure that one out too. But as far as My Number is concerned, 87% of those polled said the prime minister is doing a poor job on that. And 27% were just ambivalent. They said, I don't know about My Number, but it's either here or there. So 87% said, we dislike the prime minister and his handling of this because he's just screwed it up. And about 22% said, well, we're not even following it that closely. There was another question that was poised about Konotaro. How do you feel about him doing it? And 52% of those polled said he's doing a poor job of it. 18% said he's doing okay, and 30% said, I don't know, I really don't care. So it's pretty interesting when you follow these numbers. How many people support the LDP, what they're doing, how they're propelling the country and the economy forward? That actually has dropped 2.5% from the last poll, and they are coming in at about 21% approval rating. That's the LDP. So the LDP bigwigs and the LDP members of parliament are looking askance at the prime minister, saying, you know, what you're doing is kind of, you can be diminished by your actions, but you're actually pulling us down too. We're at 21% approval rating. That's mostly because of the disapproval of the public towards the cabinet, and that's related to several scandals that are going on, but also related to you. You're evaluated as doing as poor a job as you have ever done since you've been prime minister. So this snap election idea that we talked about over the last 3 months, it's been quiet now since the diet closed down almost 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. The next item on the agenda is a cabinet reshuffle, and that is expected to be in September. The prime minister is calculating when would be the best time, and there are some news reports on when he's going to pull that trigger. But let me just finish up with what the poll said about the Japanese population, how they feel about Japanese politics. So the LDP is down. The next closest political party that is ranking is Nippon Ishin, which is formed in Osaka. It's really making great headway. Only 4.2% of the Japanese population expressed any appreciation for what Ishin is doing and what their prospects are. Komeito, which is the coalition partner of the LDP, they logged in at 4.1% appreciation. It's up 0.05%, but it seems like everybody else is falling down. The Constitutional Democratic Party has a 3.3% approval rating. The Communist Party has a 1.3% approval rating. The Democratic Party of the People has a 1.2% approval rating. Reiwa has 1.1%. Shinseito has 0.7%. The Social Democratic Party has 0.6%. And Seijika Joshi has a 0% approval rating. So these numbers kind of indicate, and they come out at a pretty pregnant time when the prime minister was talking about a snap election. He wasn't able to achieve that. He didn't have enough wind. He didn't have enough appreciation. He's really not going to be able to call a snap election now with these numbers. The best that he can hope for is a reshuffling of the cabinet and great appreciation for what he's done with the new ministers of state that he's selected. I don't know if that's going to go. Let me see. The cabinet reshuffle, the prime minister is considering timing. He actually wants to have the cabinet reshuffle in early September, and everybody else in the LDP is saying you need to do it in late September. If you do it in early September, you're going to be jammed. There are too many things going on. You've got several international trips that are planned, plus the United States trip, G20. You've got travel to Indonesia and India. The UN General Assembly is on the 19th of September. Boss, you got to push it off. He wants to have it earlier because there are other things that are going on. But the budget is being, the budget propositions are being submitted by the government agencies in early September. So he's got this to consider, and the launch of an extraordinary diet session where he would consider a supplemental budget to account for the inflation and the wages that are not really matching that, and how much money he needs to pump into the economy. So definitely there will be an extraordinary budget. I'm sorry, an extraordinary diet, maybe November, October perhaps, but he's got some fireworks headed for him. So when he's going to do this is going to be really important. And the reason why it's important is because he is definitely going to shuffle some key members. He's going to shuffle the not just the cabinet, but also the LDP leadership, including Mr. Motegi, who is the Secretary General and not his favorite person. So what he does with Motegi will be instructive. He moves him. He was minister. He had ministerial portfolios 3 other times. When he takes him out of the LDP, where is he going to put him? If he just leaves him alone, it could cause a little bit of bruised feelings. And there aren't very many places he could go. So that decision, is he going to, throw down the gauntlet and actually challenge Mr. Motegi, or is he going to give him a safe landing so that he keeps him close and not so rambunctious? Because if he's loose, he's got the 3rd largest faction. His faction is actually larger than the prime minister's faction. So he could cause some trouble. Secondly, we've got Kono Taro, who is the minister of the digital agency. Probably he is going to be switched out, even though I think he's doing an excellent job. He's probably one of the most recognized Japanese parliamentarians. People tend to like him. He's fluent speaker of English, a Georgetown graduate, very affable, and he wants to become prime minister too. So he's got a great legacy behind him. But I think the prime minister has got to hang the blame for the my number on somebody, and it's not going to be the prime minister. So I think he will move Kono Taro, and I don't know what he's going to do with him. Similar to Mr. Motegi, Kono Taro has had 3 ministerial portfolios. He's young, he's vibrant. He doesn't have his own faction. That didn't prevent him from running as a candidate last time. He came pretty close to becoming prime minister. So how he handles those two, and there will also be some other, the chief cabinet secretary likely will be changed. He is a member of the Abe faction. And how he makes these decisions will have reverberations into one of our other favorite topics about what is going to happen with the Abe faction. I don't have any new news to share with you about machinations there, but it's pretty much status quo from our last discussion about the 2 issues. One, the leadership being a triumvirate of senior members of the Abe faction, or the second option is it splits up. Mr. Seko takes a group that is represented by those who belong in the upper house and whoever else wants to join him, and forms his own separate faction, thereby disintegrating the Abe faction. I don't know if that one really has more merit than staying as a cohesive whole. So I pretty much think that decision will be made as a consequence of the cabinet reshuffle. And by the end of September, I think there will be a clear distinction of how the Abe faction will be run and handled. You might have noticed that Taro Aso, who is the vice president of the LDP, that means the president of the LDP is the prime minister. Taro Aso is the vice president. He was, for the longest period of time, the foreign minister, the finance minister, and he carries a lot of weight. He is a very prominent, very successful, powerful LDP maven, and he's visited Taiwan 2 days last week on Monday and Tuesday. This is pretty significant. It is not since Japan established diplomatic relations with Taiwan in 1972 that a person of Mr. Aso Taro's status has visited Taiwan officially. This is a very big deal, and it signals once again to China that Japan and Taiwan are very, very close, even though we don't have formal diplomatic relations. The signal being sent there is, stay off of Taiwan. Taiwan is suffering continually with Chinese encroachment. Just this last week, you might not know this, but there is a shallow shoal that protrudes in the middle of the Philippine Sea. It is, let me see, it's called the Second Thomas Shoal. And I don't know if it was on purpose or by accident, but in 1999, a large Philippine ship was beached there. So it is stuck on this reef. And since 1999, it has been occupied and manned by the Philippine military, thereby kind of extending the the economic zone of the Philippines. The Chinese are doing the same thing by burying, soil into these shallow areas and building artificial islands, thereby increasing the economic zone of China. So there's this race going on. The Philippines are not building an island, but they have a ship that is occupied that's beached on a shoal. It needs to be supplied by boats for food and necessities of the people, of the soldiers who are living on it. And these supply vessels were attacked this last week by water cannons, not by guns, but the resupply of these soldiers has been hampered, and the Chinese are again beginning to increase the tensions there. The deputy prime minister said in Taiwan that the relations between Taiwan and China are reaching a very serious danger point, and we need to be prepared for that. So once again, we've got the 2% increase in the defense budget, the naval exercises that are going on with Quad, all of the things that are going on with the naval exercises with the Soviet Union and China in northern Japan, and the Chinese in the southern islands. So it is a real hotbed of activity. So you can be sure that when President Biden and President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida get together on the 18th, there is plenty to talk about, and I think some decisions that will come out of that. This summit is going to be for 2 days. The Prime Minister will come back to Japan, and he is going to then announce possibly the release of the Fukushima tainted water. This is something that we've all been waiting to hear. It has been quiet so far. They have announced several testing activities that are going on and how these test results will be released to the public. So it's reaching a little bit of a crescendo in terms of just keeping it live in the public eye. And I think this is in anticipation of us waking up and the Prime Minister announcing that as of today, we'll begin to release the Fukushima water into the Pacific Ocean. This process is going to take several years, decades, in fact. There is so much water stored up. It has been cleaned from some of the radiation, but it will be released. And I think this will be one of the topics. The Prime Minister is going to delay talking about it or releasing it until after the summit, because it really hampers the standing of President Yoon in South Korea. There are a lot of people who are very adamantly opposed to Japan or anything that Japan does, and there are some that are trying to be more friendly. This is on the political level. At the social level, the Japanese people and the Korean people are very friendly. There are few issues that are resonating there. And the amount of trade that goes on and the number of people who Japanese people who live in South Korea and the number of South Koreans who live in Japan it's probably the third largest denomination of foreigners who live in this country. But geopolitically, the fact that Japan is releasing this water does give fuel to the fire for those people who are opposed to President Yoon. And you might remember when he became president was just by a thin hair. So his support of, building better relationships, better relations with Japan does generate some backlash. So he's dancing a fine line. So there's a lot to anticipate and looking forward to how that shakes out. Finally, as you know, scandal pretty much dictates the ebb and the flow of Japanese politics. We've got a couple of scandals that are going on now. It's not that I mean to harp on them, but they are influential in what the prime minister does and how the public views him. And I think one of the reasons why the approval rating is so low is because he's got two major scandals. One is with regard to his right-hand man, a friend of his in his own faction, who is embroiled in a kind of murder cover-up. It has now become known. So the person that he is married to now, Kihara, his name is Mr. Kihara. He's a member of the lower house. The person that he's married to now, when he was dating her 10 years ago, her husband was committed suicide. At a time when they were dating, she had absconded with the two children. He was trying to have access to the children, and there was some sort of a confrontation, and he was found dead with a stab wound to his throat and a knife. And the prosecutors, the detectives, first came in. They thought it might be a murder, but it was hushed up and it was qualified as a suicide, strangely enough. 10 years later, Bunshun has come in and reopened that investigation, and it does look like it most likely was a murder. And so now we've got to find who the murderer was, and many of the fingers are pointing to Mr. Kihara or an associate of Mr. Kihara. So it's a big deal, and it does reflect poorly on the president and the cabinet. Mr. Kihara is not in the cabinet. He's facilitating the prime minister, but I think this is really pulling down. I mean, it's like a cover-up of using influence to make the public prosecutor's office qualify this death as a suicide, and it's now coming out. Bunshun, for 5 weeks in a row, has reported on Mr. Kihara, and I don't know any politician or movie star or anybody of prominence in Japan who has been able to suffer that kind of onslaught. So that's dragging down the prime minister. The second one is the bribery scandal of lower house member Mr. Akimoto. If you joined us on the diet tour about a month and a half ago, we had a tour of the diet. About 45 people showed up. We went through the diet, and we had a very nice dinner organized by Japan Expert Insights and Maya right afterwards. But we were greeted there by a vice minister for the foreign affairs and a good friend of mine who took questions and kind of gave a bit of a stand-up briefing there, which was really well appreciated. Mr. Akimoto occupies the same position as that individual does in the parliament, at least as of last week. So he had to resign. He is no longer Mr. Akimoto is no longer a member of the lower house. And he was caught in a bribery scandal with a wind generation company. So several millions of yen were handed over in his office, and it became disclosed, and he resigned immediately. This is something that really besmirches the prime minister and his entire cabinet. So he really needs to do a cabinet reshuffle to kind of push these aside and bury it and say that's old news. It doesn't impact the current administration. And when they do a cabinet reshuffle, as you might know, they also shuffle the leadership of the LDP and also the vice ministers, the parliamentary vice ministers, and many of the cabinet posts or sub-cabinet posts. So it's a very big deal. If the prime minister does it in early September. He's got his hands full with the everything else that's going on, all the travel. It's more likely that he will push it off to late September. We're going to continue to watch that and report it to you. Let me see. I think that is about it. Just to wrap up with Mr. Akimoto, since he was pushing so hard on renewable energy, he was very close and friendly with Kono Taro, the digital minister, and they were also both very much involved with former Prime Minister Mr. Suga. There's a group there. It's not a habatsu. It is not a faction, but it is called Ganesha no Kai. It's an association of many members of both houses in support of or in affiliation with Mr. Suga. And Mr. Akimoto was in that group, and now he's out of the group. And it also really hampers this ramping up of renewable energy, which Mr. Akimoto was a very strong proponent of. So there's a lot to be looking out for. And I think next week our briefing will be even more robust. That's about all I have to say for what's going on in Japanese politics of importance now, Maya. I really appreciate everybody tuning in. And if you have comments or suggestions, we'd love to hear them. And let's maybe move into the Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much, Timothy, for the briefing. Yes, we have a couple of comments actually on LinkedIn. The first one is from Hiroko, and it's about the foreign population in Japan. That she read that it's the population consists of 3 million foreigners at the moment. And I remember clearly that maybe several years ago, it was, I think, 2019, there was some statistic there that at that point the population was 2 million.
That's right.
That's right. Right. It was growing, but recently, obviously, more foreigners have been accepted here for different reasons. So this is obviously a trend that will continue to grow. And I wondered, Timothy, whether, well, let me say that before the pandemic, actually, there were about, as far as I remember, 80,000 expatriates, foreign expatriates working in Japan. And at that time, in 2019, the Japanese government set a goal of increasing that number to 230,000, I believe. So, and of course, the pandemic hit, and then they couldn't realize that goal. But has there been any development on that as well, or there is no talk whatsoever after?
There's no talk because
right.
there is basically no development.
What
they tried, it's kind of like. Can you turn your mic off? That's what my phone. There we go. So what they've tried is kind of like what they tried to do with getting women more involved in politics and in business. And it was, leveling up women and having them more engaged. They tried that for a couple of months and it didn't quite work, so they stopped it. Similarly with bringing in the expatriates, and the expatriates are a small portion of the number of foreigners who live in Japan. The vast majority of foreigners who are counted in this population growth are from China, Vietnam, and South Korea in that order. And that consists of about 70% of all of the foreigners who are coming into Japan. And the expatriates are of a little bit of a different quality because they're residents here, but they're not long-term residents. So they bring their kids and their dog and their American Club membership, or they're running a company on behalf of some global operation, and they're a couple of years here and then they move on. And what the Japanese government wanted to do was increase that, as you said. And one of the ideas was to make Tokyo a financial hub. So at the same time that Hong Kong was beginning to dive and all of the repressive actions by China going there, the people in Hong Kong and the companies who had set up financial businesses there was, if you've been to Hong Kong, you know what I'm talking about. They were looking for a place to go. And Tokyo was considered as one of those markets. And the Tokyo governor was really hot on trying to make Japan a center to attract this kind of investment or this this kind of business development. It turns out that most everybody went to Singapore instead because Singapore, the language there is English. They've got a well established foreign community. They know how to deal with it. Japan is a little bit less familiar. Their tax code does not favor foreigners who might live and die in Japan. Their inheritance taxes are very, very onerous. And even after you've left for 10 years, the Japanese government has the ability to reach out and grab some of your inheritance, even though you've been sent here for 4 or 5 years. You've got the Carlos Ghosn incident where expatriates are thinking, hell no, I'm not going to live in Japan and be subject to potential prosecutor fraud. So the time to make Japan really robust and maybe a 24-hour city, for example, or to make the facilities better for the foreigners to come in here, it kind of fell flat on its head. And so Singapore is enjoying that, less so for Indonesia, but Japan is not really benefiting robustly from that initiative.
Well, thank you for that. And then we have a question related to this topic. Why are some foreigners called expats and not others?
Yeah.
So, yes, that's a good question. Thank you very much for that.
Did I respond?
Did I respond to that?
No, maybe. Well, I think that the distinction here is basically whether you're a long-term resident or a short-term.
The
distinction is a little different.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Turn your mic off, please. Your mic. There we go. So the distinction here is expat has it's somewhat of a pejorative. People think of an expat as somebody that's smoking a cigar and he's driving in a car with the top down, and you never see Japanese people, or you rarely see Japanese people driving a convertible. So the expats are being sent here by their company. Maybe they're global executives. It's not always the top class. It could be their general counsel or somebody in marketing or sales who is really good at this skill, and who is very familiar with how things are done in the headquarters. And though they're sent here, so they get an expense budget. Their housing is typically paid for. Their kids are sent to the schools. These are really valuable people. These are kind of expats. So you could say that people who come here to set up a company, to establish a base for selling their product or their wares, they do kind of qualify as an expat, but typically expats are being sent here by their company. They're going to do a job, and probably they might stay longer, but typically they're here on behalf of the company. So they get a little bit more pay. They can live a little bit more lavishly, because some people would say, coming to Japan is a bit of a hardship. So in order to encourage me to move my family there, you need to make it more attractive to me. You have to give me a better salary. You have to give me better benefits. You have to make sure that the house that I have here in New York is somewhat represented by a similar housing in Tokyo. Otherwise, please send me to England or Bangladesh or someplace else, because I've heard stories about Japan. So that's pretty much the distinction. So there are people that come here on their own volition. They teach English, or they matriculate into society by going from one job to another, building up their skill sets, or they've maybe come here as a foreign exchange student and they've continued to live here. Those aren't considered to be expats. So the expats are kind of, it's a pejorative word too for me to use, but it's kind of like the fat cats. And I think that's what the distinction is.
Okay, thank you for that, for clarifying that. We have a couple of comments in Clubhouse as well. So the first one is from Ferran. While you were talking about the mission to the moon, the moon lander, so Ferran said, worth mentioning that JAXA, Japan's space agency, is launching a mission to land on the moon called SLIM next week, if no more delays occur. So far, Japan has never landed on the moon, and that includes a failed landing by a Japanese startup earlier this year.
Yes, just 2 months ago.
Yes, to which Mario replied, "I'm sorry to say, and I'm sorry for the Japanese rocket industry, but they don't put rockets into orbit. Many unsuccessful attempts in the recent 3 years." Yes, this is unfortunately, yeah, that's what's happening at the moment. So I believe that still Japan is not going to discontinue these attempts, right, Timothy?
No,
Or
I think the drive to develop a homegrown space industry is very strong here. Some of the universities are involved, but this last attempt to launch the rocket was by a private consortium. It's not so much the Japanese government. The Japanese government is doing it through JAXA. It has not been altogether successful. It's not like North Korea. North Korea has got a very well developed launch and rocket capability. But the Japanese, like in many areas, they're not compelled to develop that because they've got the United States, and the alliance between the United States and Japan is so strong and so robust that Japan can spend more time and energy in other areas of the economy. But I think, excuse me, with the growing influence of what space is for any country, for any nation, and the appreciation for what exploration does, I think they're trying to jump into that as well. But yeah, I agree with Mario. It is unfortunate that they've been strapped with, some failures, and you'd really like Japan to do much better at that. I mean, it's with so much time and energy and effort that they spend on it, and how meticulous the Japanese are technically, it is a surprise that they haven't been more successful. But I think, the same thing happened in the United States. They were for years experimenting with it, and plus they had much of the technology brought by the Germans that they had developed too. So they were able to leapfrog a little bit. But yeah, it remains to be seen how Japan is going to handle it. But I don't think they're going to give up on it.
Right, probably not. There isn't anything for them if they give up. So, and then, of course, continuing the topic here, Gerard, as always, Japan has big dreams, but too little English skills and too much red tape. Well, unfortunately, that is true. But also, I believe that the situation with the English skills is changing gradually because there are more and more Japanese people who actually are quite skilled in speaking English. So things are changing slowly, but not too slowly anyway. So they're changing there still. Yes.
On that point, Maya, you'll remember our briefing last week.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, please.
Sure. Sorry.
Where they did a test of all middle school and high school students. They tested almost 500 schools, a massive test, and less than 10% of the students passed the oral comprehension, the spoken ability of English, and this number is a huge decrease from what was pre-COVID. So Japanese students, Japanese university students, were exploring opportunities to have a homestay overseas, or maybe foreign exchange with other universities, and that's really fallen down. So the appreciation of being able to speak English, and I mean, put it into context. This is Japan. It's their country. Many people would feel that they don't need to learn English. I mean, the English speakers are here, but they're just visitors. And I do fine in Japanese, and learning a foreign language is really difficult. So I think you've got that one sliver of people who are internationally motivated, or they're honing their business skills to have a better salary, have a better job, and learning English is seen as one of those skills to get there. But I think that appreciation has probably died down as a result of COVID, and all we can do is hope that it resurges. But Japan is like the Galapagos Islands. It is an economy unto itself, and it can provide products and services that nobody else needs or wants, but it's going to provide enough income and production just in the the 125 million people here. So even though the products and services are not world renowned, they are in some industries. Cars, the automobile industry is the lead revenue generator for the Japanese country by far. So automobile parts, and by the way, used automobiles are a huge industry here. As you know, the Japanese car industry, if you buy a new car, you have a test for its viability and its defect ratio that lasts for 5 years, and you're supposed to get another test for it on the 5th year. And many people say, look, it costs a lot to have that retest. I think I'm just going to trade out that car and get a new car. That happens a lot. So that means that these secondhand cars, are thousands of them. And since they're Japanese drivers and Japanese roads, and they don't use salt on the roads, these are really good used products, and they provide a massive trade benefit all around the world, from Africa, China, Russia. They just closed off this pipeline to Russia. The last ship to take secondhand cars to Russia was just this last week. So the sanctions of Japan joining, the sanctions regime imposed by the United States has now spilled over into cars. So there's going to be a premium on Japanese cars even more in the Russian countries. A bit of a diversion, or from the topic at hand, which was, English speaking ability. Did I lose you, Maya? Maya, your mic is not on, your video is not on. Maybe you got mad at me for asking you to turn your mic off.
No.
Here she comes.
Yes, definitely. Apologies for that again. Okay, so the thing is, we are going back to the comments in Clubhouse. Here we have, yes, Tomoko saying economic security, yes, is important. So for economic security reasons and for also general security reasons, it is important to keep trying. I believe, Tomoko, that you are referring to the efforts to continue develop that's the space industry here in Japan. And also, yes, Gabor, Bobby, I'm sorry, we had connectivity issues. Hopefully you can hear me now. Yes, and then from Richard Walton, Richard says, sorry to change topics, but what about the weak yen? Some Japanese industries benefit and others suffer.
Yeah.
Seems like this balance has changed over the years as there is more offshoring and fewer products exported directly from Japan. What are your thoughts?
Yes, so I should have mentioned this before. So the yen now is in the 142 range, and that is a huge decline from where we were 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. When the yen approaches the 145 yen to the dollar exchange rate, all of a sudden things begin to happen that are very deleterious to the economy and to those people who are making money because the yen is weak, compared to those who are not. So there's this balance, and it's talked about in political circles all the time that if we push the yen down so it's more valuable, the people who are generating a lot of revenue from exporting sales suffer, and that adds to our coffers. So the Japanese government gets a bit bigger of a hit. They get more to chew when it's a foreign revenue that comes into the tax than the consumption of Japanese goods. So the tax accounting is more beneficial to the government when it's related to foreign exchange. So when it's high like this, all of a sudden companies and citizens begin to complain even more bitterly. And so that's the tension there. So you might remember that maybe 10 months ago, the Japanese government, when it was about the 145 range, went in and purchased bonds. They purchased massively, several $billion worth of funds were purchased to prop the yen up and bring that number down. They brought it down to about 141, and then after that it began to fluctuate between almost 135, but it was in this range of 135, 140. So it's kind of like a thermometer in the Japanese nation. When it's going up like that, that means somebody's making a lot of money, and the Japanese population is typically suffering. So you can see this. The Japanese government actually announced the largest increase for civil servants just this last month. So Japanese civil servants will receive an increase in their salary. It's about equivalent to about $27 increase in their salaries. It's not very much, but it is one of the largest increases that the civil servants have enjoyed in about 20 years. And they've also enhanced the initial pay for people who are joining from the universities or joining from private industry to come in to become a civil servant. So this is trying to serve two needs. When they come in, they want to attract people into government service, because many of them are going into the private practice where the salaries are higher, and they feel like they can be a little bit more flexible. They can work from home. They have lots of different kinds of benefits that you don't get from the government. But the second reason is that these young kids, university graduates, not even mid-level, young level bureaucrats, they want them to start having children. So give them a better pay salary, and help them purchase their house or get their parents to participate and get this economy going. So you can see this throughout the entire economy. But it is, when you see this kind of thing happening from the government, you begin to see these little blips that tell you that they are really across the board attempting to address the issues that the really difficult issues that they're trying to address.
Okay, so thank you for that as well. Timothy, it looks like we have gone through the comments and the questions, and there is one thing that we actually need to address next week, which is the invoice law, because it's going to be changed, I believe,
right,
that at the end of this year. So let's do it next time, or maybe in 2 weeks, because it's still due bond week, right? And yeah, there is quite a lot actually to be done there. So with this, I believe that, you can go. I don't know whether you're going to your boat today or you will be working on something else, but thank you very much for the briefing. This has been great. And to everybody who has been with us, thank you very much for tuning in on Sunday morning at 8:20. We appreciate that. And we'll be here once again next week at 8:20. So be with us again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maya. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
See you.